Welcome in, folks. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming, and we're going to be talking about the new card, Valentina. I know, I'm excited too. Look, Valentina is a very unique card coming to Marvel Snap, and honestly, she's unique, and that's about it, because there's a lot of cards that do what she already does, but in different configurations, so it's a part of it. I'm not sure 100%, maybe kind of, sort of, but maybe you're interested, especially if you are a Loki player. But don't worry, you don't need to have Loki in any way, shape, or form. There are other decks that I think that she will actually be mildly valuable for. So let's talk about what Valentina is going to bring to Marvel Snap. So first and foremost, before anything, as always, if you like this style of content, breaking down new cards as they come on out and exciting decks, make sure you like and subscribe down below. So let's continue on and head over to what do we got here for Valentina. Valentina, she's a 2/3, add a random 6-cost card to your hand and give it -2 cost, as well as -3 power. So there's a lot of different things to think about here on this card. Number one, if you break it down part by part by part, the way that the dials can be adjusted on this card is incredibly important to assess its early value. Because one of the biggest hot topics, in my opinion, in Marvel Snap recently is the fact that cards in general are adjusted by second dinner regularly. We have OTAs every other week. We have a patch once a month. You never know if a card is going to go up or down. Look at what happened to US Agent and Rulk most recently. So what's going to happen with Valentina? Is it going to be a card that stays as is? Honestly, I don't think so, but not because I think it's going to be a nerf-worthy card or a buff-worthy card. I think it's a card that just has so many dials upon it that you can change its cost and power like any other card, but it also has 3 other dials built into it. The random 6-cost card can be changed to any cost. The reduction on it can be changed to any reduction, and the amount of power on it can be changed to any amount of power. We saw them willing to do these kinds of changes with US Agent, so I wouldn't be surprised if this card decides to underperform for them to be able to quickly do a buff. If it overperforms, they have so many different ways to quickly do a nerf. This, in my opinion, no matter what you play, justifies Valentina to me as being a safe card to invest in. Now, whether she's your top pick for the month, that's probably been decided previously for you, but I do think she's a very valuable card for 2 specific archetypes. I see it for Loki, and I do also see it very much so for discard in a variety of different ways. So let's talk about some of the decks that work best for her. Just remember, she will be counterable via a variety of different methods. For example, her as a card herself, you'll be able to disable her via Cosmo, of course, and all of the fun on reveal interruptions. But more importantly, look at what's happening with the card itself that it generates. Those 6-cost cards that are now going to be 4-cost. Someone else plays a Mobius, you now just have a weaker version of a 6-cost card. Same thing with the reduction in power. You can also go about that by countering it with your own Luke Cage, possibly even an ongoing extra effect via a Shadow King. There's several extra pieces you can do to reevaluate what this card is going to do. Let's look at several different ways that I think she's going to be most effective in Marvel Snap, okay? I have 3 different Loki builds to get us started. All of them, I'm VaLoki decks. We're going to call them VaLoki decks. Why? Because it's Valentina Loki. That's exactly what it is. Let's take a look at what VaLoki does. First and foremost, this version is going to be the VaLoki Swap. VaLoki is taking the cards and focusing more heavily into the Loki game plan. This is, I'm trying to flip the cards over from my opponent. That's what you're doing. You're trying to flip the cards away from your opponent as much as possible. Many Loki decks are more reliant on this synergy and have less secondary game plans built into them. So, because that one needs to lean very heavily into it, this is running the Kitty Pryde Angela Hope Summers line. Understood? Got it? So you want to give that like, hey, I'm bouncing early, I'm getting power in one of these lanes early, then looking to Loki on 4 or 5, big flip over in that moment. That's what this deck is attempting to do better than any other version of Loki, because you have the flexibility to bounce the Kitty Pryde on Angela, to take the Jeff and put it onto Angela, ramp up that lane, and then move separately. Rogue is specifically here, not because she's going to steal any ongoing. She's specifically going to try to defend against Mobius M. Mobius, which would be a huge detriment to the Quinjet Loki case number 1, but more importantly, the Valentina reduction if you do decide to play that card as well. She's a triple threat to take care of your opponent and defend against what you want to do with this core of a Loki deck versus one that focuses very heavily on Mill. The Mill package is very popular. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately, while Baron Zemo is the season pass. So now that you're looking at the version of let's Yondu, Cable, Baron Zemo, Gladiator, this one's more about interference with the opponent versus the more selfish style of gameplay you see with the first version, which is about building up your Jeff, your Kitty Pryde, etc., on Angela. This one is looking to say, let me take your Baron Zemo card, let me pull a card with Cable, let me get some extra pieces out of your way and interfere with you that way. So my big play then ends up becoming Mockingbird, because now you've got the Baron Zemo cards, now you've also pulled cards via Cable, you've got Snow Guards, Hawk and Bear as well, reducing down the cost of the Mockingbird, and you cannot get that Mockingbird Shang-Chi'd. Unless if you put it into an Elsa Bloodstone filled position, and I would never recommend doing that anyway for protection purposes. So a Mill style of Loki, Valentina also fills very well on, but just a different role. You do have the Quinjet piece, of course, in here because you're still trying to get cards out there for cheap, and Cable allows you to play that cheaper card also. But Valentina giving you a 3-cost 3 reduction card. I can't get my words out today. This is what happens on Monday mornings. Bear with me, folks, as we try to get that 3 and 3 reduction off of the Valentina out there. Look, most of the 6-cost cards, there are 26 of them right now in total in the game that you get to choose from, and they all get a -3 reduction via Valentina's effect. About half of them actually have value still as a standalone card that you can play out for 3 cost, even if it's just straight up power, something like a Hulk or a She-Hulk, for example. But the synergizing surprise effects are what make these types of decks incredibly popular. Think of all the amazing plays that come out of Agent Coulson when he suddenly procures a Iron Man out of nowhere or an Enchantress out of nowhere. That's why this is very exciting. So what else can you do in the Loki side if you're not a Mill-focused player? You can take a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and take that Loki Bounce combination and use that as your ramp ability piece. So we go back to that Angela build, and now we're looking for these extra pieces to really grow Werewolf by Night as your win condition. So each Loki deck is running very different win conditions. This one's looking to grow the Collector, Werewolf by Night, and Angela specifically, because you have a lot of cards coming back into your hand, and the Collector surprisingly ends up in several decks with Valentina, in my opinion, because you are looking at card generation, but in a variety of different archetypes, and he's kind of the bridge between what I consider a good Loki deck with Valentina and a good discard deck with Valentina, which we'll get to in a moment. I'm also choosing to run Mirage here specifically because more often than not in the current meta of Marvel Snap, minus Kitty Pryde, most of the 1-drops that are very popular right now, your top 10 most played 1-drops, are on reveal cards. So Mirage has a very good chance of targeting an on reveal for more power and also be able to play it later on as another bounce piece for Werewolf by Night. This makes everything so appealing in this deck because 10 out of the 12 cards are 2 cost and less. And I like that for a bounce deck. So I feel more confident being able to play Werewolf by Night because you basically take one of 2 different lines. You either go the Werewolf by Night ramp bounce line, or you go the Loki line and just say, well, I didn't get a good draw, let me Loki everything out. Now, Loki, of course, will not ramp up the Collector because of that incredibly awkward change that they made to Collector about transform versus adding cards into your hand. But the deck still synergizes together even without that direct synergy. Now, moving on outside of Loki though, what can you do that is not a Loki deck? Well, I ended up in this very weird Shuri Poison. Hear me out. I wanted to find something that would allow that card that gets generated from Valentina to not lose its power. So of course you go down the path of Luke Cage. And when you go down the path of Luke Cage, it brings you to all of these other cards like Hazmat and US Agent and Typhoid Mary and all of these very negative hazardous cards that you don't want to be hurting you, but you do want some of them somehow to be hurting your opponent. And as I realize those cards start to fill in, they also fill in with the old school Shuri Sauron deck. But Sauron doesn't make a lot of sense because it's going to outdo Luke Cage. It's going to undo what Luke Cage has. So I end up using Luke Cage in this deck more so as a replacement for Sauron versus it being an addition into the deck. So we have the secondary ways out of it. You have your Zero in here, right? Zero into Lizard, Typhoid Mary, Red Skull. It's always a confident build at any given point. But now with the new US Agent giving that -4 power, that Luke Cage looks even more appealing than Sauron did, because playing down your US Agent plus Luke Cage plus Red Skull even with giving power, you don't feel that bad about it, because don't forget how powerful it is in the worst case scenario with Red Skull. Red Skull, Shuri into Red Skull, that's still a 520. Even if that lane is full, it's a total of 520, and people underestimate how big of a deal that is because we got all distracted by the Infinite and War Machine and oh my god, 20 power card. This is the OG 20 power card in my opinion, because you can still Taskmaster it. Zero is your outplay here, but Valentina giving you that 6-cost card could be that consistent surprise piece, because now it's just a 4-cost version of that 6-cost card, and Luke Cage prevents that reduction from your side of the battlefield. I like this style of deck for a lot of Affliction, which we are seeing. Affliction, anti-Affliction, again, also reminding you why I do think that Rogue is going to be a very big piece to many decks moving forward. But until we start seeing that, I think that this might actually have a small chance. This is called the Valentina Collection. The Valentina Collection is playing into that discard-ish archetype a bit via Helicarrier, but we're just bringing the yo-yo mechanic. What I've dubbed yo-yo mechanic, which is Lady Sif into Ghost Rider. And typically you want to play that with a Helicarrier because it's going to allow your collector to go way up. But there are other mechanics that you can capitalize with that. The brand new and improved Mantis. We're going to see if she actually has a home here, because that could be a mechanic that allows the collector to ramp up. You've got 2 cards coming in from Snowguard. You've got Maria Hill giving you a 2-cost card, and half of the 2-cost cards are on reveal cards also. Easy to put out there at any given point. No matter what it is, it's very rare you end up with a really negative pull for what your deck is trying to do, even outstanding. Moon Girl is in here because it's going to ramp up the collector, and Mockingbird just makes organic sense because Mantis, Maria Hill, Nico Minoru, Snowguard, Valentina, Moon Girl, Helicarrier. That's 7 cards out of the 12 here are giving you cards onto your side of the battlefield that did not start in your deck. Mockingbird's an organic fit, especially with Moon Girl. If you can get 2 of them in your hand, forget about it. It's going to absolutely scale that collector crazy high. I like the idea of putting Valentina in here because having 2 of those cards, remember, Valentina plus Quinjet plus Moon Girl equals the same 6-cost card being doubled in your hand and now only costing 3 cost. You could play 2 6-cost cards on turn 6 in this deck. That's very exciting to me, so I want to see if we can make something like this work via the yo-yo mechanic in the Valentina Collection. Lastly, this is the heaviest lean into the discard archetype. This is not your average discard deck. It's a Wong deck with discard and stupidity simultaneously. So it starts off on the discard side where you've got your Blade, if you've got a good hit, for example, which is specifically Swarm and or Apocalypse. Turn 2, you're ideally looking for Collector, because you should always be looking for Collector on turn 2 in this style of deck. Then turn 3 is where your flexibility can start. You have the line, for example, of Hope Summers into Wong into Dr. Doom, which is a very surprising play because Dr. Doom onto Wong, that's going to put out 4 Doom bots, which means on the final turn of the game, Mockingbird will cost 1. And that's with no other cards whatsoever going down on the battlefield. And it's a mechanic that's not being utilized. So let's put Gambit in there for that Wong synergy. Let's put in Baron Zemo even for that Wong synergy. Let's get a bunch of cards out on our side of the battlefield and get that Mockingbird on the final turn of the game to be 1 or 0 fairly regularly. If all goes well, you should always end up with either Swarm or Apocalypse in your hand in some way, shape, or form. And don't forget, the Swarms that get copied in your hand after they come to 0-3, yeah, those also reduce down Mockingbird too. So you can play them out and drop down Mockingbird's cost also. So there's a lot of different ways to multiply cards with this deck via discard, but you also have the backup plan of playing Dr. Doom, which is just one of the strongest cards in the game still after a year and a half, that it's very flexible. So if you really need to lean heavy into discard, you're safe. If you really need to lean heavy into the Mockingbird line, you're safe. You have destruction elements via Gambit. You have scaling elements via the Collector. You have mill elements via Baron Zemo, and you can play that directly on Wong to take out 2 cards. Right there, you've got 2 reductions for Mockingbird by going Wong, Baron Zemo. There's a lot of flexibility with this deck also as well. And I think that for Valentina, who could give you 2 different 6-cost cards via Wong in this deck, also being super reduced, possibly having Blade get rid of those cards if they end up being sacrificial lambs of nothing important, but you could still then get the Blade out as a 1-3. It's a great integration for discard because it does a lot of ramping while giving the flexibility of saying you don't have to, because you have other mechanics built into the deck. So my question to you, as always then, folks, is out of all of these mechanics, do any of them make sense for your style of play? Is Valentina going to be a card that you should put into your deck? In my opinion, I think she's probably one of the safest investments in Marvel Snap right now because of all of those dials that Second Dinner can work with, no matter what happens to this card. If it's good, if it's bad, it's easily adjustable via an OTA, and it will balance in with the rest of the meta. And when certain metas come to rise, she can also help to combat them. Is it worth 6,000 tokens? I don't think it's worth collector's tokens to be able to open up, but I would say this is a good 4 spotlight card. It's like 1 step below a guaranteed you should absolutely have this, in my opinion, because of how flexible it is in specifically a very strong archetype like Loki, but also a very consistent archetype like discard. And I think over time, we're going to find more and more decks that Valentina is going to be able to grow in as more 6-cost cards also come to the game. At the moment, there's really not a lot of negativity when it comes to which 6-cost cards would be bad for Valentina to pull. There are not ideal pulls, and yes, there's Agatha, but even without that, it's still a great situation to be in because she's a well-rounded card. She has a very easy kit to work with if something does go awry. Safe investments are great investments in Marvel Snap, and in my opinion, Valentina is a safe and great investment. Hopefully that gives you some direction on my opinion of Valentina, and we're going to be trying all these decks out on Twitch on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. We're going to try a whole bunch of stuff on out. Be ready for a lot of Loki in the meta. It's going to happen. I'm not taking credit for it. I'm not the first to think of this in any way, shape, or form. It's just an obvious fit. I just wanted to give you different options as to why Loki could be good in secondary archetypes too. So thanks for watching. Greatly appreciate it. Like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff down below. I'll see you all next time.